oatmeal.
Okay. Notice how she answers to her proper name.
If I don't, you won't stop bothering me.
Oh, I'll find other ways to bother you. No problem. I got that covered. Go ahead, Justine. Justine, your mic's off.
Yeah, I'm struggling. So I said that the idea of world expansion and going forth and multiplying was all based on Christianity. And what they thought they were doing was good by teaching the laws of God.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Didn't you say something about this type of war, though, being different? I thought that was you. Maybe it was somebody else. What was different, anybody? I'm sorry, that was good what you wrote. I don't want to embarrass anybody yet, except for the Bruja, but I don't want to embarrass anybody else. What made this type of war? Some of you, yeah, Marissa, your hands up.
Yeah, what made, oh wait, we're talking about like the massacre, the Mystic Massacre, right? Or are we talking about chapter 2?
Mystic Massacre.
Okay, so what made this one different was that it was like the first one that was done. Like this, like war wasn't like they didn't do this before, like the colonists, but like the tactics that they used at Mystic was then repeated for like years and years and generations, and like that's how they further attacked Native Americans, and that's how they also stole their lands.
Yeah, and some of you wrote about it. It was the first time in North America that there were wars of annihilation. Prior to this point, if Native Americans had their war, it might be over fur, it might be over something else. Does anybody know what the word coup means? C-O-U-P? It's French, but it was used by Native Americans. Or what's a coup? What's a coup d'etat?
Isn't a coup d'etat like an overthrow, like a revolution?
Yeah, where a quick blow of the state. The bravest thing across the country in Native American warfare would be put your hand down, Marissa. The bravest thing in Native American warfare was not to kill the person, but rush into an armed enemy, tap them on the shoulder, and run out. Because that's braver than just killing them, because you could be killed. And most Native war was limited. If somebody in your village was killed in a hunting party by somebody else, you would go kill somebody from that party and often go adopt somebody from that party. For example, if somebody from Bayonne killed my granddaughter, I would go to Bayonne, possibly kill Gabby, but then I would bring home her grandfather and adopt him into my tribe, but he would take on the role of my granddaughter. And that was kind of the custom, right? And that's how wars were expected to be fought till the British got there. Now, there was genocide in Virginia, and we know about that. But the warfare was here just to wipe out an entire people. Okay, and that became the practice in North America. And that's really important. Okay, what else on the homework? What happened to the Pequot afterwards?
The Pequot villages try to help, but they came late. So the Englishmen sold out for them and tried to like eradicate them.
Yeah, and those that they didn't kill, what happened to them? There was
it was sold as slaves. No.
Yeah, sold as slavery, generally out of the continent to the Caribbean. Okay, and some of you missed that the English had two allies, two groups, the Mohegans and the Narragansett. You know, which is ironic because then the English later on wiped out both of those tribes too. And anybody read the book The Last of the Mohegans? Okay, that's kind of the tale of that from a white man's perspective. It was about trade, and it was about the fur trade. And it was the English didn't want the Pequot trading with the Dutch in New Amsterdam, so they wiped them out. And so that's what that little video was about. Okay, going back to New England, you could see the PowerPoint. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. Caliban. Did I do this first one the other day? I'm getting senile, you know that. Caliban in the theater was a devil of a vile race. He had distinctive physical characters. He was a thing of darkness. He had a sty of a lodge made of hard rock, and 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. And so again, the play was depicting Caliban as a monster. Racial distinction between Caliban and Prospero, and the savages are living there. So again, it's how, whether he meant it as a satire or not, it's how he was viewed. And the Puritans. And a thing I beg to differ with, they didn't really come here necessarily for religious freedom, because most of them, they didn't even come from England. They had been exiled from England and mostly came from the continent. They came to take land. And on page 38, they recognize, whoa. Is our buddy John Smith again? He arrived from Virginia without Pocahontas. And the first people had cultivated lands. He referred to it as paradise with corn and groves. So they knew at the beginning that they were not living in sties, but they changed history. Squash and pumpkin and some tobacco, granaries. They rotated their crops. Why do we rotate crops?
So each of them get enough sun on a specific side?
Yeah, that, and crops take in and give out of the soil. So they take nutrition out and they put in other things. So you don't want to plant the same thing every year in this field. They use fish as fertilizer. Anybody do that? For years I had an aquarium, and when a fish would die, I'd throw it in my plants. And the problem was I'd forget to bury it deep enough so it stunk. But the fish was so plentiful in New England that they could actually cultivate a field with dead fish for the fertilizers. So the stereos of hunters and gatherers, again, was way, way off. Now, the Champlain said, even recognized us when they came. Morton, who you read about earlier in Virginia and Ireland, they dug up the ground with fish. Winthrop, who was said, despite the fact that the fields were sandy and rocky, they were able to raise good corn. And this is very important. They take away their grain according to their need and preserve it in other granaries. About 5 years ago, they dug up a granary from this time, and the grain was so well preserved, they could still eat it. Just like diapers and hot dogs, it didn't decay. But of course, we have to have justification for what we do. Now, this is really important. Some of you knew about this. They were really weakened before the Puritans got there. They had contact with European fishermen for probably 50 years. And a lot of the villages were already cleaned out. And they had a lack of resistance to European diseases. Just like in World War II, we had the flu epidemic, and today we have COVID-19, that certain peoples are not resistant to certain diseases. Now, Bradford, who was their governor, but felt God was behind it, proudly stated they died like rotten sheep in the field. And he said it was God's will. Does that sound familiar in anything in other groups or the United States since then? Anybody know the term?
Yeah.
Who said yeah? Go ahead.
Marissa did. Isn't that like how like the US like used religion like manifest destiny basically as
Yeah,
like the reasoning behind expanding and like stealing the land from Mexico?
yeah, as well as others. Yeah, and that was the term I was actually looking for, and we'll run into it a lot. Manifest destiny. It was the order of God. It was our Christian duty as a nation to colonize first the new all of North America, Mexicans, Native Americans, and then to go overseas. Bruja, that oatmeal looks really good, but you should wipe the corner of your mouth. The other side. Okay, good. So this is not unusual, nor is it unusual for the United States. Most wars are fought with God's will, okay, on any side of it. For it pleased God to visit these Indians with a great sickness and such mortality that of 1,000, 9,500 of them died. And another governor, Winthrop, said, God was making room for the settlers and hath cleared our title of the place to the place. So they were very serious they were doing the act of God. They didn't see themselves as conquering people. They thought God had did it. John Cotton, another one of their leaders, it was a sign of God. Okay, now you read about the Pukok War, which is really a massacre. English with fellow tribes. And this became very, very big. Does anybody know about the so-called French Indian War of 1767?
Yeah, I just don't know like all the details.
Well, give us some of the details.
I know that they sided with each other, the Native Americans and I think the colonists against the French.
Yeah. Now, don't forget, as I said before, French controlled Canada and Upper New England, and the British had the rest. So it was basically a proxy war for the two European powers. And you had groups like the Hurons fighting the Iroquois, and the Hurons were totally wiped out. And that was a big piece of this. A young guy was captured, the guy that later on stole teeth from slaves for his false teeth. Does anybody know who that was? George Washington. But here the survivors were sold as slaves. And John Mason again firing place with body. Thus the Lord was pleased to smite our enemies in hinder parts and give us their land and inheritance. But again, as I said, the most important part of this war was that it set the groundwork for these total annihilations of groups. And the book also talks later on about King Philip's War. That was another one. Okay, the land itself, as in England, as in Virginia, savages were in the way. New England was a little bit different than Virginia. Anybody here from New England, Marissa? Marissa, what state are you from?
Yeah, no, I'm from Connecticut.
Okay, so the land is pretty much shit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, unlike Virginia, where you could grow a variety of crops, Virginia, only about 20% of the land, and Connecticut is actually the most fertile, is worth planting crops in. So the land competition was much more intense. And the justification now included, even though they had recognized initially that they had very advanced cultivation, now they said they were savages, they were hunters, and they only used a quarter of the land, none of which was true. They did do hunting, but none of that was really true. William Wood, one of the colonists, all spoils rot rather than starve. They'll rather starve rather than work. They want a manuring, gathering, ordering. They us land like us. I don't know what that means. They were like the foxes and the beast. Now, did any of you, we talked a little bit about the play, The Crucible. Does somebody want to review that for me? What was the play, The Crucible, Karen?
The Salem witch trials, but it was around Abigail. I forgot her last name, but she started to.
Proctor.
It was I thought it was John Proctor.
Oh, right. You're right. You're right. Yeah.
I forgot her last name though, but it was they had like a little thing, and then obviously she got mad, so she started to grab attention by she grabbed all these girls, and they were like, oh, let's act like we're possessed by the devil or whatever, and then the one person that did get killed was Tituba, I believe her name was, and I believe she was African American, like the only one there that they mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was written in the 1950s, and it was really about the McCarthy anti-communist trials, which were called witch hunts. And this was a witch hunt. And it was talking about mass hysteria. And did anybody watch the CPAC yesterday? Trump's golden return, where, the same sort of crowd mentality. But the key people in this were Cotton Mather and his son Increase. That there is a devil is a thing doubted by none, but such as under the influences of the devil. So only those who were led by the devil were the ones that said there was no devil. And he said, why is my thing? And that was supposedly said during the Salem witchcraft trials. The devil decoyed those miserable savages to New England in hopes that the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ would never come here to destroy his absolute empire. So he said that at the witch trials, but he was really going after the Native Americans as well. And he feared mixing with the devil, becoming Indianized. Now, this was somewhat true in Virginia, but this is one of the big differences besides the land use. Here is absolutely forbidden, this absolute fear of mixing with the devil or the Indians. Now, Increase Mather, so driven, I die in the faith of a speedy accomplishments of these glorious things, which are spoken concerning the city of God and the kingdom of Christ. Amen. Even so, Lord Jesus, come quickly. We need help to get rid of these people. So God had to come quickly to get rid of that people. Deaths were viewed as the end of the devil's followers. Okay. Have any of you heard of Cotton or Increase Mather? They're actually, I think, really important people in our history because they set the tone for exclusion and religious justification that we still face today. Bradford still has a statue up. We talked about Sir Walter Raleigh having his statue up, slave owner. Okay, William Bradford banned visits because he wouldn't let the colonists visit the Native Americans because there would be inviting women to consort. He also banned people from the Dutch, the French, Portuguese, and Spanish. So the pilgrims that came for religious freedom really were just for their own religion. Who's heard of William Penn? I'll give you a hint. He has a state named after him. William Penn. What state would that be? Wyoming or Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania.
Very good. What was he doing in Pennsylvania? What's the nickname of Pennsylvania? Is it called the Mormon state or the Quaker state?
Quaker?
Quaker.
Bingo. William Penn got thrown out of Massachusetts, the Plymouth colony, because Quakers were not allowed there. There was a famous hotel in Newark. I don't know if it's still there. The Roger Williams. Is that still there? Okay. Roger Williams got thrown out of Plymouth colony for being Catholic. So these people that were there for religious freedom didn't believe in freedom at all. They believed in their own conquest, their own land, and they certainly were fearful of the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese, and the Spanish. So strict laws of separation. They didn't want to be contaminated. They didn't want to be exposed to their vices. The ultimate horror of becoming negative. And sexuality. That's Miranda again. When was the last law against interracial marriage in this country? Probably after slavery ended. Maybe Brown versus Board of Ed. Did anybody see the movie Lovin'?
The interracial couple in the Deep South.
Yeah. It was illegal for interracial marriage in Maryland until the 1970s. Okay. Going all the way back. This terror of mixing. So let's talk a little bit more about Thomas Jefferson. He was compassionate, according to our history books. He practiced genocide for those that live a little deeper. Used to be easy to say he was a man of his time, but that's not an excuse. And other people grew. Benjamin Franklin kind of lived forever and was pretty much pro-slavery until his last 2 years. And there's a lot of writing that he reversed that and was basically ashamed of himself. Thomas Jefferson, when he died, did not even free his Black children. Okay. He didn't grow. He did have this sort of fake compassion. He said about Native Americans, they were born in the same land, so we should spoke friendship to them. But then he admitted that one of the things they did was they set up trading posts in Indian territory in order to make the Indians go into debt in order to take their land from them because of this debt. So I don't know if that's compassion. He also made a promise that no colonist would go west of the Allegheny Mountains. Here are the Allegheny Mountains. How'd that work out? Look at all the Native Americans that were here, all of whom were either killed or exiled. By the time we got to Andrew Jackson in the 1830s, all Native Americans were ordered west of the Mississippi. Now, the Seminole in Florida were Spanish. That was Spanish territory. So this was his promise that he made. And it was a promise that he already set the seeds of breaking. But we put him on the dollar bill, the $2 bill in this case. And his idea was to force the abandonment and turn the land into agriculture. Now, to him, what was agriculture? This is extremely important. Did he grow tomatoes? Did he grow alfalfa?
Was it cash crops?
Yes. Explain who said that, Anthony?
Yeah.
Explain what a cash crop is. This is so important.
It's essentially so something that you can grow and sell. So it'd be like tobacco.
Yeah, you can grow it and sell it, but you can't eat it.
Yeah.
And so his idea of agriculture was first tobacco and then cotton. And then rice came in too. But all of this was exported, which means they weren't going to feed the people there. Very typical of colonialization in Africa and in Asia too. More trading group post to sell, more manufactured goods. And he wrote about this. This was not an accident. Okay. Did anybody get this part of Thomas Jefferson in school? Where, Robert, you did. You seem to have gotten a little bit more complete history than the others. How was it approached? And how did the other students react?
So I went to high school in St. Joe's in Metuchen. Our history professor was a lawyer, so he was very he also was very blunt. So he kind of like always like didn't like I guess water down like events. Like he would say, this is what a lot of people will like learn, but in reality, like this person was like an ass, or like their true intention about doing this was actually this. I also really enjoy history, so I try to like
I could tell that from your writings already too. But
I love it. The last professor I had for military history, we dove into the French and Indian War, and it's like funny because like everyone glorifies like George Washington as our first president, but he was like a real idiot when it comes to like
he was captured.
yeah, and then he signs off the treaty that pretty much starts the war is in French, and he doesn't speak French clearly, and he asks for a translator, and the translator is I think like Dutch, and again doesn't speak French, so he pretty much signs like, yeah, we'll start pretty much like signing the treaty that's going to start the war. And all the founding fathers in their own way, like they all said like, oh yeah, we don't support this, but we don't want to address this right now, and they kind of like pushed it off, and that's how it went for about like forever.
Yeah, and playing the tribes against each other too.
Oh yeah, that was the best part.
Did people in your class try to protect Jefferson's image, the students, because we're all taught that he was such a hero?
Not really. I mean, no one really had a background on Jefferson as opposed to like other like presidents. So they're like I see that now in college, like a lot of people like have this idea of Jefferson of like, oh, he's one of the greatest presidents of all time. Like he can't do any wrong, yada yada yada. It really isn't the case.
Does anybody know who our best president really was? Anybody? Let's hear what your opinions are. Let's go. Who are they? Who do you think it was? People, let's go. Talk.
Carter.
Jimmy Carter? He meant well. Daniel, who do you think it was?
Let's see. Trying to think.
Okay, you keep thinking. We'll get back to you. Des? Des?
Whoever ended Vietnam.
That would be Nixon because he ran away.
Oh my God, no.
And stop calling me God. Stephen, who do you think our best president was?
Let's see. I think I'll be. No, I don't know.
Okay, we'll go one more. Abraham, who do you think it was? Abraham? Not Abraham. I think it was William Henry Harrison because he served for 29 days in a coma and then he died. So I think he was our best president ever. Just saying. The stupid fool in a snowstorm went to his parade without a hat, went into a coma that afternoon, and 29 days later died. Can't get a better, can't ask for more than that in a president. But maybe that's just me. Back to Tommy. Their lands were taken from them by conquest, so not so general a truth, I suppose. It is true that these purchases in Indian lands were sometimes made with the price in one hand and the sword in the other. So at least here he's admitting it. But he also said they would relapse into barbarism and misery, lose numbers by war and want, and we shall be obliged to drive them with the beast of the forest to the stony mountains. There he's talking about driving the Cherokee into the stony mountains of Georgia. But again, this is the guy we laud so much in history. And in fact, he was Prospero. He was saying the same thing that Prospero was saying. So, saw the triumph of the continent and the Indians as a movement from savagery to civilization. They read the same. So we'll stop share. Any thoughts? Because I got a lot of other things to talk about.
I just remembered because you asked about if we learned this probably prior to college or prior to this class. In high school, in like my sophomore and junior year, I had a history teacher. His name was Guy DeVincent. And he was also like blunt as well. And he like taught differently. And I liked how he taught because I feel like he prepared me for college because it was like you read the chapter, you write, like you outline, make an outline, and then you hand it in by this date. And then we would just, he wouldn't be like typical like, oh, like teaching like, oh, like events, stuff like that. No, like he would give his own 2 cents, and it would be like a whole class discussion. So then I think they were talking about like the presidents, and then he's like, oh, did you guys know that he owned slaves though? And then everyone was quiet, and he's like, yeah, like you all think that he like is this great person, but he actually owned slaves and did a lot of bunch of terrible things. So, and then everyone like they didn't oppose to him because we all knew that, you know, he knew his stuff. So I guess, you know.
And anybody else get a different view of history? I think we kind of vanillize it, or, you know, make it into this very, we do anyhow. That's why we don't, and as I was saying, we don't remember a lot of people. Don't know of a lot of people who we should know about. That's one of the things you're going to learn about this semester. And a lot of it's upsetting. Somebody tell me about Jefferson's kids. I've made a lot of references to them. And for a long time, this was denied. Anybody know? Okay, he had kids that are slaves. That was denied until 1970 when the DNA test came out of survivors. He had, quote, a mistress. I don't know. Oh, Marissa, your hand's up.
Didn't he also like, because isn't the mistress his wife's half sister, who was a daughter of like his wife's like father, like had a mistress of one of the slaves, and it's like that's like the daughter.
Possibly. I've read that. I don't know.
Okay, that's what I read. And
Yeah.
like I also read that like he took like his mistress like to France where she was technically free, but he like guaranteed that like if she went back with him, their kids would be free, but then he didn't even end up like freeing them, right?
Yeah. Her name was Sarah Hemings. And he kept promising her freedom, took her to France. But she was still considered a slave in this country. She came back. She came back because he said, I'll give your kids freedom if you come back. So mistress is kind of a horrible term to begin with. But when you're forcing a slave for sexual privileges, it's even worse. He didn't free any of his children, did not acknowledge his children. He did sell some to the Northerners, but none of them became free. His descendants mostly denied this until DNA tests came out, and their first reunion of both branches of the family was in 1970, and I would have loved to have been there. There's a governor, Livingston of New Jersey, who was somehow from his white descendants, and there's Livingstons in New Orleans that are from his Black descendants, and they actually patched it up, but most groups did not. But, you know, again, why people like him, George Washington, a slave owner, all of them. I mean, we got to really question why they're so revered. What do we get out of it as a nation? What do we get out of not exposing the other sides of these people?
Professor, we're really not getting American history as it should be portrayed. And
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, that's, I guess, the issue of why we have all these different racial disparities today, because people are taught, well, exactly, upholding white supremacy. I mean, that's the whole issue, because by not teaching the correct like story of history, you're not getting anything. And you can
Yeah.
see that in the South with their textbooks, where they're not even remotely close to the standard of what should be taught.
Yeah. And it also is not, it's white supremacy, and what goes with that is elite supremacy. The fact that virtually all of our presidents came from very elite backgrounds. Clinton did not, but most of them did. Trump, millionaire on both sides. I'm on his father's side. Bush's father and grandfather father was president, grandfather was governor. You get that pretty much through our history, that we don't very, very far from white men or from elites. And it forces people not to ask questions. And watching that thing yesterday in Florida, where a significant group of our population will not accept the election, it really sets us up for demagogues. And I'm actually surprised it hasn't happened sooner. For those of you who attended Gerlach's speech on Wednesday, was it last week or Thursday, about Germany in the 1930s, the parallels there are frightening. And I think I mentioned my son kind of got removed from the second grade for challenging Thanksgiving. They didn't know what to do with him. So he's a history teacher now, as is my other son. And I'm so proud of them because they don't go by the textbooks. So I think we'll stop there. And you know what you're supposed to do for the rest of the week, right? I'm going to go have my chills still because of COVID, but I'll be back. A little bit of a good discussion today. Thank you. Take care, everybody.